Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever live episode of the Elevate podcast. I'm your host, Darrel Girardier. I serve as the communications director here at Brentwood Baptist Church. And with me today, I've got two very important guests. The first is Dr. Mike Glenn, who serves as the executive director of our senior pastor here at Brentwood Baptist for over 32 years. Strother, who is our current senior pastor here at Brentwood Baptist Church. Today, we're talking about transition without tension, a roadmap for passing the pastoral baton. Glad that you're here today. I'm excited for this conversation. Let me kind of set up the table a little bit for context. Sure. For if you don't know much about Brentwood Baptist, we are a campus church of 9 locations. What makes us unique is we're not video venue. Every single campus has their own pastor who preaches the same text that they're in. So we're a little bit unique. But today we're talking about the transition of going from Mike to Jay and what that process looked like. And how do we do it healthy? Because you guys, I'm sure, have seen and heard transitions that just didn't go the way they were supposed to go, were not handled well. And I think we feel very good about the transition here that occurred here at Brentwood Baptist. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So kind of setting the stage here, Mike, you were here for 32 years. That's a long
I was here long enough for children to become my boss. That was the nursery role when I first got here was now the people voting on my salary.
Exactly.
And it was like, I don't know about this.
It's a slightly odd feeling.
It's odd feeling.
Just slightly odd feeling. So 32 years, that is, gosh, that's a lifetime for most pastors to be able to do something like that. Mm-hmm. When did you start to sense that, hey, there's time for me to start thinking through what's next for not only me, but for the church as a whole?
When I came in 1991 is when you start thinking about, hey, listen, I've got a run. Bill Wilson came when the church was first started, when the church was planted. He was the first pastor, but he had a run. And I took the baton from Bill, and I will have a run. Okay, so you want to start well, you want to serve well, and you want to finish on the upswing. You don't want to overstay your welcome or overstay your energy or gifts, so that the church becomes lazy, unfocused, whatever word you want to use there. But they start kind of mailing it in because, well, the pastors, we're not going to do anything new. You don't want to lose that energy. You want to leave. It's like a comedian. You want to leave while they still want you to come back. Yeah. Kind of thing. And we've all talked about this and various other conversations. People don't think I pay attention, but I do. And the number of churches just in Middle Tennessee where a pastor had done a good job for a long time, he leaves and the church is dust. And that was what I was afraid of, that we would put all his life and work in and it would just blow away. So, when you stay at a church 32 years, you pastor 4 or 5 churches at the same address. And every time I would get a little antsy, the church would have a transition. I'd learn new things, do new things, and so it stayed relevant and a lot of fun for me. And I began to sense that, okay, we're on the verge of a 6th congregation. Now, here's the challenge that I handed to Jay. There were neighborhoods around our church that, and you know how I say this, that we considered ours. If you lived in this neighborhood, you go to Brentwood Baptist. All of those people have moved out. People from California, Michigan, Illinois, Massachusetts, all those people have moved in. Torn down the houses, rebuilt houses, all of that. They live in the literal shadow of this facility and do not know we're here. So while my ministry was out, Jay's ministry is going to be back inside that central circle.
And by the way, not just California and Michigan, but China, India, the
exactly
Philippines,
right.
South Africa. I mean, it's amazing how Middle Tennessee's changing.
But they're all right here.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So how you tuck that ministry and focus back in would be a lot of fun. It would also be 4 or 5 years.
So you started to get the sense of like, hey, okay, so I'm on church number 6 in this building, and you're thinking, okay, all right, I need to start past. I need to pass
batons. They need more energy than I want to bring right now. I've got grandchildren I want to spend time with. I've got other things I want to do. I've got writing I want to do, and also. You could sense they needed a different gift set. Okay, okay, I'm a good fastball thrower, but the next batter, he hits the fastball. How do we get a guy who throws off speed in here that can, but whatever image you want to lead, we're going to do the same thing, but there's going to be different aspects to it that one, I don't do well and frustrate me if I had to do it that way.
Yeah, I get that.
You get a guy who thrives in that environment.
Yeah, because we have a parallel. You've got this going on, and then for those of you who don't know, Jay was our campus pastor at our Station Hill campus, which is south here of the Brentwood campus. It is the second largest campus, growing. At that point, it is probably 13 years old at that point, Jay? Or maybe
that's about right.
Close. And so you have grown that from the ground up.
Yeah.
That was a straight up, you could think of it like a church plant, if you will.
Yeah, in some ways.
So as you're watching this happen for Mike, what is your thought process on your side as you think, okay, there may be a transition coming for you?
Yeah, well, I think, looking back now, first of all, my calling, right, the word the Lord gave me was surrender. So you're trying to live surrendered to what God puts in front of you and be faithful with that. Mike was talking about, 5 different congregations. Well, the Lord called us here 23 years ago. And so I got to be a part of maybe 3 of those 5 congregations. And so I had watched the church, grow through these iterations over the years that helped prepare me for context, DNA, those kind of things. Every church has a story. And you need to get to know that story and the people who make up those stories. And so having the benefit of basically having a 20-plus year job interview, I didn't know it at the time that's what was happening. You're just trying to live surrendered and show up and be faithful with the next thing that the church calls you to do. If you don't know the story, it even backs up farther. I came as the middle school minister. Mike used to joke after we got down the road with this conversation. He's like, "You're going to have that started in the mailroom story," But there is something to be said for you learn to lead over by leading under first. And so, the things I could try and learn with young families, as Mike mentioned earlier, the other kinds of, strategies, having launched the first campus. Now we have 9. I know what those campus pastors have gone through and what they experienced. So as the conversation took place, there was a turning point. And Mike will tell the story of the time where he sensed, what God was doing. And he took my wife and I out to lunch and just said, "Hey, tear up your resume. I think your future's here." Now, Mike wasn't presumptuous. And again, it wasn't, "I'm going to handpick you to be my successor today." But I appreciated that because we were very engaged with the work that we were doing there. We were very focused on it. And our response was, "Man, we're humbled that you would want to see us around for the long term." But it gave me enough insight. Mike, again, just from the Lord, I think gave him that insight to say, "Hey, I need to tell you that you have a future here." So I would say for some of the pastors out there who are developing team members, you need to let them know. You need to be an encourager to them and say, "I can't predict what the future is going to do or what the church is going to choose when that time comes." Because the way our system is set up, Mike didn't get to just call the shots. There's a whole process. We'll talk about that in place. But instead, he did let me know that, hey, he believed in me. He believed in our family. He believed that we could have a future. And that was enough for me to say, okay. Then when Mike called on sabbatical, he was on a sabbatical and started saying, "Hey, man, I'm talking to other pastors in Middle Tennessee who really need our help, and I'd love to give them some of that time." I knew the wheels were starting to turn. And so the Holy Spirit prepares you through that series of stories and conversations for what's next.
Yeah, then the process becomes, how do we begin the process of training Jay? So every time there was an opportunity, we would throw him into deeper water.
Right.
And so when he get really good at something, we'd change his job description and throw him somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, you slowly, progressively
got.
And Mike's famous quote, "Inch over your head, mile over your head, you're in over your head."
And over your head. You got to swim just as hard, so it doesn't matter. But, interestingly, when we started Station Hill and we sent Jay down there, leadership of the church came to me and go, whoa, we don't want to lose Jay. I said, well, let me help you.
Yeah.
You're going to lose Jay. Okay? We're not the only ones who know how good he is. We're not the only ones paying attention to him. Somebody, if we don't keep him engaged and challenged, somebody's going to come with a plan that he wants to be part of.
Right.
Okay, so the choice you have is how you lose Jay. And let's lose him to the campus.
Yeah, that makes sense. It does.
Yeah.
So going back to your situation a little bit, Mike, when you got the sense that, okay, this is time for me to start thinking through that process, I need to start engaging in that process, who were some of the first people that you dialogued with about that?
After 32 years, you develop a pretty good kitchen cabinet of guys who have walked with you and advised you in key situations. And a couple of them were former pastors and denominational leaders who understood the details of a transition like this, what we had to stay away from. So we actually started working on the transition piece of this about 4 or 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years before I announced I was going to retire.
Yeah, so you'd worked in advance to talk through the people.
And by that time, all the leadership knew that this was in process, in place, and then when I pulled the last trigger, then we knew what to do next. The process was ready.
Yeah, because one of the things you did I thought was interesting was you would tell some certain select staff, hey, you have permission to tell me when you think it's time for me to transition out here. Because you had said, look, don't let me get embarrassed.
Right.
Your words exactly. If you feel like, hey, it's time, you got permission to walk in my office and say, it's time.
Yeah.
Hey, you're transitioning all of a sudden. It's like, okay, this is a thing.
Yeah.
Who do you start dialogue?
Yeah.
Tanya.
Well, without
your
it
wife,
out, without it out. But it again, Mike and I had about 2 decades of history at that point.
Yeah.
And so he was able to kind of talk through what he's thinking. I'm able to share with him, what's going on for me. And here's the best visual during that time I used to describe it. 2 floating pieces of ice, right? Yeah. And you're on this one, firmly established, doing what we're doing. I told Mike, listen, until you guys work through this process, I'm good. Like we got, that campus is growing. I was over a region at that point. We were starting a new campus in Columbia. Like I've got plenty on my plate. The Lord's given us plenty to do. So I'm good. I'm not just sitting around waiting for this to happen. But you've got your feet firmly on that piece of ice. And then ever so slowly, you take your foot and you put it on the next piece. And then you gradually just begin to shift your weight a little bit at a time, if that makes sense, right? Until eventually, then you name your successor at the campus, and then but it's a delicate process, and it's air war, ground war. We sometimes talk about ground war, as Mike was talking about. You're talking to the people who have walked with you, who know you, who you trust, and spiritual mentors, advisors. Hey, am I ready for this? Is there anything in my life that I'm lacking? Do you see, areas that I need to pay attention to or have conversations with the transition team around? That as well as you're thinking about what's best for the church and all of these congregations. What do they need to see? And I knew they needed to see, hey, Mike and I, he earlier talked about baton pass. Remember in a track race, if you've got one guy coming in, the other guy starts running before the baton is passed. And then the baton is passed, and then he's running alongside for a while before he peels off. And I still think that's probably the best visual of what a healthy transition looks like. So they needed to see us. They'd seen us together in ministry a lot, but I honestly had been a lot at the campus. So this campus, the Brentwood campus, had not seen me as much. So there was a season in which they saw Mike and I kind of, sharing the preaching duties on Sunday mornings, those kind of things before, right? Mike said, here's the baton, right? And then he graciously peeled off.
Now remember, the history of the church was Bill Wilson retired. I came in. Bill Wilson came back on staff and started missions.
Yes.
But the church saw the relationship between Bill and me, and besides my own father, there was no one more impactful in my life than Bill.
Yeah.
He became that kind of friend, mentor, father figure to me. And the church relished and had more fun with our relationship. They would tell me, if I'm in the hospital, send Bill. We'll listen to you Sunday. If I'm in the hospital, send Bill.
I get that.
So that was the precedent framework that we were working under. This is how Brentwood does this transition.
Yeah, I thought what was interesting was one of the things that we did during the transition. So in other words, we are about to affirm Jay we made sure the two of you at some point were on stage together, or at least more than once, so people could see the visual of
That's
like,
right.
this is Mike is affirming Jay and literally passing the baton to
Right.
Jay. And one of the things we did, which, yeah, was a little bit campy maybe, but I think it actually worked for the audience was that Sunday we had you preach
the first part.
then we had Jay preach the second part, and you said, as you were leaving from the stage, now I want you to hear from my pastor.
Yeah.
And then you came down and you sat in the front row while Jay finished the sermon to provide that visual for the audience. which I
And
thought was
you
really
literally, there was a verbal ooh. Like
Yes,
when
it
Mike
was.
said that, like when it hit him, like it's real.
Yeah.
But again,
Yeah.
it was a good moment, and it was such a just well done, and it was.
out there right now, and they're thinking through, okay, I need to have these conversations. And during this talk we're having right now, of like, oh gosh, I have not had that conversation. We need to have that conversation. Just somebody's thinking through, I need to have that conversation with leadership about transitioning out of the role. What's some of the advice you give somebody who wants to talk to
Two
leadership?
things. One, Father Time's undefeated. Okay. The time will come, whether you prepare for it or not. Okay. So with that in mind, be prepared. And the first thing that would, Jay and I laugh because we have become experts in retirement now, because people from all over the nation are calling us going, how'd you guys do this? The first thing I tell the pastor is, go off and figure out where you want to go to. Go to something. The pastor leaves, he's used to all the energy and all the hubbub and all that. There's nothing going on in his life, so he's bored, doesn't know where to go, so what does he do? Goes back to the church. And
You and I've
for
seen guys
everybody.
do that, or they go start a new church.
Yeah, go start a new church or something like that. It's just no.
Doesn't work.
Go, and it can be anything. We got friends who fish and who charter boats and everything else, but have something that you're looking forward to.
Good.
Just don't leave the church. My time with her, and nobody, and you know this, nobody had a better run than I did for 32 years, and to be able to walk out of and all we got to see, it was an amazing run, and I'm grateful for it every day. But if I loved this church, then you leave it stronger with a clear direction of there's your future, now go get it. And I'm here for you if you need me, but I'm not going to be running with you.
Yeah.
With that kind
Yeah,
of.
to that point,
Yeah.
Mike and I decided we were going to have lunch every month just to stay connected, right? And very first lunch, he says, you need to start thinking now about your transition.
Yeah.
There's the old saying, what's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago.
Yeah.
What's the second best time? Today.
Yeah.
So to your point about when to have the conversations, again, we talk about, we did have, about 15 years ago, we adjusted our bylaws to have a roadmap. 4 and 5 years ago, Mike started engaging leadership around that. So when I tell guys that, they're all like, oh, they panic because they're like, we're already behind. But listen, the next best time to have it's today.
Yeah.
Like, just be proactive. To Mike's point about time.
I am the pastor for that person who will join Brentwood Baptist Church in 10 years. They will never know me, but they're counting on me to make the decisions right now for Brentwood Baptist Church to be everything God's calling her to be in 10 years to meet the needs of that family that I'll never meet, okay? But they're counting on me now to do the right thing, and so that this church is as healthy and as strong as it possibly can be.
So let's talk process here for 2 seconds. Because Jay, you mentioned that, but 15 years ago, we made the bylaw changes for that. What is, if you could simplify our process, Jay, what is our process for how we select a senior pastor?
Yeah. So when we moved to what's called modified congregational governance, it means we empowered a group of people called the trustees selected by the church to represent them in most your, decision making. One thing, the only one staff position that the entire church votes on is senior pastor, because those leaders felt like there was real wisdom in the entire church affirming that process. And so the way the process works is actually the predecessor doesn't handpick, as we mentioned earlier, the guy. The bylaws outline that there will be a team appointed by the trustees who will make a recommendation to the church on behalf of the trustees. Now, of course, Mike, 32 years, massive influence. And so his request to the transition, right? And if he's not the guy, or if you feel like you want to open it up, so be it. And they communicated that to me, and I was fine with that, because if the process isn't affirming for us too, then we're happy in our calling and what we're doing right now, or in our assignment, I should say. And so then the entire church, we go through a process. So Mike announced his retirement in January. Not going to be around forever. And some churches put into place are too close together, and because it's like, whoa, old guy's going, 2 weeks later, a month, 6 weeks, whatever, here the new guy comes, or the other in the spectrum, as Mike talks about in the traditional Baptist church, the guy announces he's retiring, and then they go choose a committee. Then it may be a year or more while they're vetting. So it's almost Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? It can be too hot, too. Announced it. The trustees knew, because ready in place when he announced his retirement to vet me. I went through that process, and it was thorough. They produced a 80-page document on a guy who'd been on staff for 20 years. But they felt like, the church deserved that. And anybody who wanted to double click and just said, well, Jay's just the obvious guy because he's been around and, he and Mike have worked together. They wanted to demonstrate. No. And it was important for Tanya and I to go through that process. So then all that led up to a church vote.
They were probably harder on him than they would have been anyone else.
It's probably
because
true.
They didn't want to be caught giving him the inside slant. They didn't want to be exposed to that.
You're right.
So then we did a campus tour. So I went to all the campuses, the Q&A, got to know everybody, so.
I ran you through the ringer. That I helped develop.
It's your fault. It is. It's your fault.
We made you go to three campus visit, which are 3 regions.
Yeah.
I made you do coffee with the senior adults. You had to do breakfast with the deacons.
Yeah.
I was like, we are going to say without a shadow of a doubt, everybody had an opportunity to meet and greet with Jay.
Yep. And it was wise. We joke about it, but it was actually enjoyable for me, and it produced, as I processed, what did people talk about? What are they concerned about? It helped me, my first year as in the role, to be able to say, this is what people are really thinking. This is what they're really worried about. But all that led to a church vote. And I believe it was 99.6% or 99.8% or something. So you 4 people out there, I know who you are. No, I'm teasing. I honestly don't. But the point being is, when was the last time you heard about a vote that was that confident? And again, it didn't have to do with me as much as it did their confidence in the process.
Right. Well, a couple of things we did was, we kind of realization was, from a communication standpoint, was often what you do in these processes is you tend to think, I'm focusing on communicating about the candidate, the person. But we took a different approach and said, actually, we're going to over-communicate our process for how we got to this person. Because if you over-communicate about the process, by the time you arrive to the person, people already bought in because they bought into the process. They're like, oh, wow. No, it was as Jay said, it was a long, lengthy process before we even got to announcing Jay. And so we could tell people, no, here's the process, an 80-page document, all of those things. And what that allowed us to do, again, was we had all that lined up as a team. So we already knew, okay, Mike's made the announcement, and people all of a sudden got idea because they're like, well, we trust you guys because, again, we understood the process. Now, the other thing we did was we actually had the chair of the team that selected you, Mike, 32 years ago. He gave me the notebook on you, all the material, all the promotional materials, even letters for you and against you, by the way. Cool thing about that was, this is actually a little bit of our DNA.
Right.
So don't think of it like baby photos. We get to look at it and we kind of go, okay, where's the commonalities in the tone, how we present it, that we were able to. This language right here, language for when we affirm Jay. And so the cool thing about that was, with some of our senior adults, I was able to say, remember that process? That actually we matched a lot of that process when we brought in Jay. So I think that was kind of a fun thing to do in terms of the entire process. Now, let me talk about staff for real quick, because we've been talking about people. Let's talk about staff.
Sure.
Because you had to prepare your campus for the fact that, hey, you were coming to the Brentwood campus. You had to prepare the church staff and the campus staff for that transition. So how did you, Mike, begin to prepare us as a staff for the change?
Well, for us, it's a little different in that it's always been about the church. It's never been about me. The way that we're set up is the church recognized that I have certain gifts and abilities. They named those, affirmed those, and then staffed around me the people to support when I don't do well. So the whole process is mission values aren't changing. Jay is different from me, so we may tweak this or that, but there's not going to be a broom come in and clean
System quarterback.
Clean house. Yeah. It's a system quarterback. Yeah. So
how did you prepare your campus and your team for
they're still mad at me.
Oh, they boo you when they show up at the camp.
You show up at Station Hill. Not too far from the truth. Again, had individual conversations once it was appropriate to do so with the team members. And then you work in concentric circles until eventually you tell the congregation. And I stood up and I told them, I said, we talk often about living sent and about going where God calls you. And I said, I know it feels strange. But I said, I have to follow God's call, even though it's just back to the Brentwood campus, But I told him, Brentwood or Bangladesh, like if God calls you, you better go. And I told them, what I model for you is as important as what I preach to you. My life has to speak as well. And so we've prayed through this, thought about this, and you're honest. We've raised our kids in this community. We've walked this campus from birth, from our living room to where it's at now. So that part's hard. But we also know that, God has called us to this, and that you can trust that God's going to bring the next guy, to Mike's point, and he gave me the language, right, for the next 5 years at Station Hill, for what this campus needs to become. Because again, I've been there 15 years. They've only known me. And so I said, a year from now, I hope it's, man, we love this new pastor. Who is that Jay guy again?
Your trivia
and that's because that's the way it should be. And to some degree, we just celebrated that campus's 15th anniversary, and they had the people stand up who've come in the last 18 months, and it was like a third of the congregation who don't really, they know about me, and I'm still the senior pastor, and they see me on videos and stuff, but they don't know me.
Right.
And so what an encouragement to know that, we left it healthy. That campus is healthy. So it was interesting because I had to receive a baton and I had to pass one at the same time. I was kind of the middleman on that relay.
Yeah, that was, it's been interesting to watch from this seat, that transition. I was with you the other night when we were at Station Hill, and we had this video. We played a 15-year anniversary, and your voice comes on the screen, and it's a very younger version of actually both you guys talking about planning that campus.
I didn't have gray hair. I was like, whoa.
Yeah. But then John Joseph, who's the new campus pastor there, his voice is on the screen, and all of a sudden the crowd erupts.
Yeah.
And you're kind of going,
his introduction video.
Yes.
And they clapped for his introduction, and then it was like people were like, well.
And it was just one of those cool things to see, like, okay, this is
spontaneous.
Spontaneous, and it kind of cemented that transition, which I thought was a really cool,
good observation.
A neat thing to see. But were there any key leaders that you felt like, okay, I need to take these people out for coffee and give them a heads up? Any key leaders in the church that you felt like you needed to go with? Yeah. For you, like, what was that conversation like?
Well, a lot of those private conversations were people that you had developed a unique relationship with. Teenagers that had grown up under you who were now leaders and that kind of stuff, and who you were actually part of their family, kind of thing. They got a heads up, kind of thing. So,
all right, we got questions from the audience, so I'm going to start pivoting to those. So if you got questions, you can throw them in the chat on there, and Dylan's going to shoot them over to me right here on my screen. So first question: if the lead pastor has a successor in mind that is a current staff person, when should the succession plan be communicated to the staff and to the congregation? So this is assuming that I guess the senior pastor has some sort of, when do we start communicating to the staff, like, hey, in other words, if you think about it, you've got congregation we communicate to, Well, actually, what's the time difference between that and communicating to the staff? Or do you do it at the same time, or do you just separate that out? How would?
Well, what do you mean by communicate? Okay, I never stood up and said, as senior pastor, I'm telling you that Jay Strother's the man. We did subtle things, like we kept putting him in positions of leadership, campus-wide leadership. Yeah. He preached on this campus often. Yeah. So the leaders of Brentwood started coming around me and going, you know, I could see Jay here, or Jay's going to take your job, you know, that kind of. Jay's going to take your job. He's getting, you know. And I say, well, give me a date, and let's.
You would often joke.
Mike's playing 4D chess, man, while everybody else is just.
Mike's often joke after Jay would come and preach. He'd come back the following Sunday. I got a lot of emails. You like Jay? He will not be back here anytime soon.
Right. Yeah. That's why we started campuses. These guys get good. I send them off. Man.
Get good, get gone.
Yeah,
Mike
that's right. Get good, get gone.
Okay, so let's pretend for a second I'm at a church and I don't have a modified system with trustees. Mm-hmm. Maybe you have an elder board, or maybe you have deacons, and we don't have a process in place. Like, where does somebody start? Like, what should they do in that case?
Yes, that's a great question. Well, I think, suggest a process to whatever leadership structure you have.
Yeah.
And again, a process that, to Mike's point earlier, builds as much confidence in the process so that the church trusts the decision as it does in the person. You know, that they've been through these steps, and that again divorces the idea of like nepotism or any kind of thing that, man, this is just the handpicked guy. I think to make the process as robust and as healthy as you can with the timeline that you have. And to the earlier question, I do think you do need to let your staff know, not way out ahead of the congregation, but those are the people who, man, they think, breathe, sleep your church all of the time, and they need to feel like they're not hearing it at the same time as Joe Pewsitter.
Right. Yeah.
That's a great point.
Yeah, we paraded him, long before we brought him out for the official transition and all that.
Well, one of the things that you did was in January, when you made the announcement that, hey, I'm going to transition out of this role. After that point, you didn't talk about him or the candidate at all.
That's
it's
right.
kind of like we put a firewall up. This basically,
it's true.
And we would say Mike Glenn is not part of this process. He's not on the search.
Yeah, we would list out the team members.
Team
Mike's
members.
not on
so
there.
everybody kind of knew. Well, Mike may have a preference. The reality of it is it's a completely independent process.
Yeah.
So let's say you're looking at a candidate, guys, and it's from the outside or maybe the inside. Let's pretend for a second it's from the outside. How do I know, what are some of the key indicators the candidate is a right fit for us to bring into the church? What were some of the things that, obviously you got the scriptural qualifications, so let's establish you have those.
Yeah.
But what beyond those should I be looking for, what churches should be looking for in their candidate?
Is the new pastor a match for the congregation in vision, context, mission?
Yeah.
Okay. We joke about system quarterback. We know of great athletes who got in the wrong system and whatever and didn't thrive. Mm-hmm. Okay. The church has to be confident in its identity.
Yes.
And in its process and its passion and its structure, to say, this is who we are. We need somebody who can lead us in this structure. If we had brought somebody in who had tried to change everything or redo the process, it would have been a disaster.
Yeah, I want to double down on that because I think what Mike says is important. A lot of churches think about it's kind of like the NFL. Oh, we're going to draft the next great quarterback and it's going to transform the franchise. If you don't have a system for that QB to fit in, you're going to struggle. And a lot of churches may first need to say, hey, we need to, we talk about our church's DNA or our mission. We may need to define that clearly so we know what type of person we're going after. Because otherwise you're setting that guy up. And some churches will say, well, we just don't want somebody new, fresh with ideas. They don't really.
No.
How many Baptist churches have we all been in, or churches, in which they say that because they want the energy, they want some excitement, but they don't really want somebody who's going to take the church in a whole different direction. So to Mike's point, I don't think you can emphasize that strong enough.
Right.
The church has to know who it is, so it knows the shepherd who can best lead those people.
Best lead them.
Yeah, I think a lot of times churches, they look for, there's 4 different types of leaders you look for. A startup, like I'm a builder. Somebody's a turnaround expert. I can get this, and then realignment, I'm going to help you slowly kind of get back from mission drift.
Right.
And the sustainer, I'm going to keep things going the way they are. Often, the first one, the builder, that's the sexy pick. That's the one that's like, that's
right,
oh man, yeah, he's a rock. He's high energy.
He grew the church over here
Yes,
at Mount Pisgah
going
number
to do
2.
X, Y, and Z. When really what they need is maybe a little bit of realignment around the mission and vision once that's defined, or maybe just sustain what we've got going. But too often they get that wrong DNA fix, and you guys dealt with this. They come in, they want a clean house, bring in their people, and then all of a sudden you've lost, as you pointed out, Mike, 2 years of momentum.
Yeah.
And let me add this. I would encourage you bring in some trusted objective voices to the process, because when I was working on my doctorate in leadership, the number one job of a leader is to define reality.
Right.
And what's sad is a lot of churches, they don't have an accurate picture of themselves.
Right.
So bring in a consultant, bring in a director of mission, somebody who knows your church, loves your church, but can give us some objective standpoint. Because they may say, we're great at reaching young families. And somebody may say, no, you're really not. Or we want to be diverse. It's like, nope, you don't have a chance, right? Because of the way you're structured right now. And so they can be honest about that and say, this is who you are. So you need to be sure that you line that up. One of the things we did for our staff was we brought in an outside group so that they felt like they had a safe place to voice their fears, to process, because they don't want to offend potential new guy. They don't want to burden Mike on it as he's feeling good about where this transition is. So what a gift to give your team to bring somebody in who loves the church, has the skills to do it. So that would be one word of encouragement I would give as well.
You're exactly right. And don't forget, if you want to ask questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I was a part of that process on the other side when we hired that outside organization to come in. And I will say, the beauty of that was, from a staff perspective, it was a safe place where they said, look, this could stay between you and me. Yep. Tell us exactly what you're thinking.
Right.
And we were able to say, like, if we had anxiety, here's the anxiety, here's this. And what it allowed us to have is a real great temperature check. Not that we would not have gone forward, but hey, here's the next 12 to 18 months of the roadmap of what, here are going to be the bumps in the road. And then what we did, we brought them back the following October to come in and just at our staff retreat and say, hey, let's do a temperature check. How are we feeling? And the beauty of that for us is that we've actually formed a good relationship with that organization. And what that's allowed us to do is to really have a good outside voice coming into that.
To spot check.
To spot check us.
Your perception of reality.
Yes,
we think we're here. Is that true?
It's the map versus the
That's right,
terrain.
yeah.
This is what we think the map is actually versus the actual terrain. So I'm going to ask you, though, probably, maybe this is a softball question. Get to do one thing differently. One thing. What's the one thing, Jay, you would do differently? Then I'm going to come to you, Mike.
Yeah. Man, again, I'm so grateful for how smooth the process went. One of the things that Mike used to say a lot was, you got to spend a lot of time staring at the walls. And so I don't think I prepared myself well in some of my time scheduling. I wanted to meet with every staff member and, connect with every, new member I could, that kind of thing. So I think in my early days as a transition, I filled up my schedule a little too much because I needed some time to process, because, call it what you want to, there's a grief cycle that you go through in any amount of change. And so, as healthy as it's been, I still had to leave a campus that we had established and a community we lived in for 23 years. And I had to take on the responsibilities of, a broader, role than I'd ever been in before. I know Mike, it's just, we've talked about it, in those lunches that we have every month. It's weird to not be like, I'm preaching this Sunday.
Yeah.
Oh, here comes another Sunday. Like, you've been used to that rhythm for 40 plus years in your total pastoral ministry.
Yeah, and Jay had, he mentioned this earlier, Station Hill was excited, rightfully proud of who they were and what they'd accomplished and all of that. And, they were our darling. And now their future is in question. As much as we would tell them, listen, you're going to be fine. Right. They had never done it before.
Yeah, that's right.
This church had never changed pastors.
Yeah.
So they didn't know. Brentwood was a little more comfortable. Okay, we've done this before, even though we do it 30 years apart. But they were a little more. Station Hill had that anxiety at a much higher level.
Yeah, and so I would say just remember that you've got to leave time and space to process the emotion of it all.
Yeah,
it's not just dates on a calendar.
There's a grief on your part.
Yeah.
I mean, it's excited you worry about the future.
Absolutely.
There is a grief of
Yeah, peeking behind the curtain for 2 seconds. When we shot the video for you to tell the congregation, this is the transition we're making. I always remember we were on this worship stage because that's where we decided to shoot it at. You came in, you took a deep breath, and for those of you who don't know, Mike is a one-take wonder, so he's great to work with. Gets on there, you nail it, and then you pause, and then you walk straight back out the door, and you got in your car and you left. And the team was like, do we get another take? It's like, no, that's it. Emotionally speaking, that is what you're going to get out of him in that moment because of what he's telling the audience. Yeah. And from outside watching, you process that.
One of the early stories, we were building this sanctuary.
Yeah.
And it was just now starting to look like a sanctuary. You could tell where you're going to stand. And I was standing in the middle of that stage, and I was looking, and it hit me one day, and this is how you say it. Somebody else is going to will have my church. Now I know it's not my church. I know it's not, but somebody else will be standing here, and I'm going to have to give it to somebody. Yeah. There's a future here in this building that I won't be part of. I broke like a baby. It was it was an awful moment of knowing that there's a future here that I will not be part of, but like David and Solomon, I'll get everything ready for that future.
So what's the one thing you would have done differently if you could?
Because we handled the transition the way we did, goodwill at Brentwood Baptist Church, I wish I had tapped some of that goodwill in helping me set up Engaged Church Network so that I could literally step from one to the next. Okay, I stepped out, then it was like, well, we do Engaged Church Network. Okay, well, it's a nonprofit. Okay, see.
And what have you learned about nonprofits?
I'm used to having minions.
Yes. Welcome to startup world.
I go in and say, hey, I got an idea, and you guys run off and make it happen better than I thought.
Now you're like, the office needs toilet paper. Who's going to get toilet paper? I've got to go get the toilet paper.
Who's going to empty that trash can? I'm doing that.
You are.
I wish I had done a better job of tapping into the business, the creatives, and all of that about how we just move seamlessly into that. I floundered for months trying to figure out who's going to take out the garbage and, why I didn't have any paper clips and that kind of thing. Yeah. How you get a website up and how you do stuff, Yeah.
And I can say from the staff perspective, if I thought what's the one thing I wish I had done differently from my seat, watching the two of you come, is I think I wish we had better communicated that we're moving to a different cadence. Yeah. And what I mean by that is,
good word.
It's I would say, like, you guys sang the same song, same mission and vision, but it's like two different styles of singing it. One may be jazz, one may be orchestra. And so when you have a different cadence, all of a sudden it takes a while for your processes and systems to kind of wrap around the new cadence and go, okay, no, this is the new rhythm that the pace that we're moving at. And so I think I would have done a better job of like saying, hey guys, no, this is a little bit of the, like for you, Mike, I'll give you a real example is you are an out loud processor. So you would say, hey guys, I'm thinking about this, then this, and I kind of know, okay, guys, give him 2 more times. If he comes back on a 3rd time and still thinking about it, we probably should do it.
Then we'll do it.
Jay comes to me, he's like, I've got an idea. Here's the white paper. I've talked to 3 theologians. And this, I'm like going, guy, at this point, we're probably going to do it because he's already mapped it out. Yeah. It's just, it's a different cadence. And sometimes staff, struggle with that. And you got to help them with that. So this has been a great conversation. You guys, thank you so much for spending your time doing this. Thank you so much for watching. Oh, before I forget, thank you, Jay, for reminding me. Mike is the author of a brand new book called Preaching in a Post-Truth World. Mike, when does this go live? When is this available?
End of the month.
End of the month. You can go on Amazon, most likely do a pre-order.
Now.
Yeah. Quick synopsis of the book.
Pastors need to realize that when you stand up and say, this is God's word, this is the truth of God, we say it in all confidence. Your church isn't quite so sure. They've heard lots of truth claims, and they're processing God's truth claim with all the other truth claims they get. Wow. So how do you preach in that world?
That's awesome. So go on Amazon or Lifeway or wherever you want normally buy books. It's Preaching in a Post-Truth World by Dr. Mike Glenn.
And
Thank you
Jay
all.
Strother did an excellent.
Oh, yes. It's the best Ford you'll ever read.
That's right. Well,
This guy
let
right
me
here.
tell you this, though. A lot of people ask, what's it like to be a part of your preaching team? That's what I tell them. You're getting to listen in to what we did with Mike, all 9 campus pastors. That kind of insight, that's what it is.
That's fantastic. All right. Thank you all
One
so
of the questions you didn't ask me
Yes, sorry.
is how does he honor me?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Remember that?
Would you like to answer
Remember
that question?
Yes. He honors me by making sure Brentwood fulfills every dream that God has for her. So that when Bill and I stand in heaven together, we're going to take full credit for all the success. Okay?
Or they're going to be up there waiting on me.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I'm serious. I'm
Yeah.
serious.
Yeah.
When people come back and tell me Brentwood is doing this, it's
Right.
incredible.
Yeah.
That's the honor.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we'll close with that. Folks, hope you enjoyed this podcast. You can join us this coming September at the Elevate Church Conference. That's elevatechurchconference.com. You can also find more resources there. You can also get tickets to the conference on September 9th. We would love for you to join us. We're going to give you an exclusive. Use the following code, VIP100. That's VIP100, and you can get free tickets to the conference. That's right. Just use that code, get free tickets. This is a one-time exclusive we're giving to you, podcast watchers and listeners. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, we'll see you then.